Hello, it's time for grade 9 theory to experience the writing of the chorale or the hymn. So that means we're harmonizing every chord so that soprano, alto, tenor, and bass can sing along beautifully and all have the right amount of notes to sing to. So the big thing to realize is that regardless of whether you do a piece that is 30 chords long or 4 chords long, you are still only looking at 2 chords at a time and how they look to each other. We don't have to compare chord 3 with chord 1. It's chord 1 and 2, and then chord 2 and 3, chord 3 and 4. So regardless of how many you have to put in a row, you still are only doing 2 chords, as in our particular exercises ahead of this. So before we get any further, can you please stop the video and look below? Because there's going to be a link, and in that link there will be some PDF information, the printout that will give you this, and also a printout for handy dandy things to think about when you are doing your own later without me on the video. So please take that moment and come right back to about 1 minute and 30 seconds. So here you are, you're all set to go. We have all of the printouts and we look and we say, wow, there's a fair amount of information to fill in. And the answer to that is, why, yes, actually there is. This particular question is 30 marks on an exam and is expected to take an hour to complete. As such, when we're doing it the first time, if it takes an hour to complete when we're closer to the actual exam, it could take longer than that right now. So I do, of course, have some tips and tricks to make it so that this is going to work out a little bit more comfortably for you. So on the chorale, a how-to moment, it says, our goal is to make a singable version of a hymn or chorale. Singable. If you, an educated musician who's been working at music since you were 4, 5, 6, or 7, how many years have you been at the piano or any other instrument? If you cannot sing what you are writing, then you need to grab an eraser or you need to sing more often, or both. So please embrace singing, because the easiest way to know you're on the right trail is to sing it through and see whether it's possible to sing. So, of course, as in all questions, the first thing we need to do is to determine what key we're in. So in here, we have the choice of 1 sharp being G major or E minor. At the grade 9 theory level, we are expecting this to be major, and we confirm that because we start on a GBD chord and we end on a GBD chord. So we put capital G, M-A-J-O-R in, and we've got G major. Now, this is where number 2 comes in. It says create a chart of the chords for that key scale. So let's take a moment, and down here we're going to go, we know capital 1, small 2, small 3, capital 4, capital 5, small 6, diminished 7. That's what our Roman numbers are in major keys. Now, starting at number 1, just say your letters to yourself for the G scale. G beside 1, A beside 2, B, C, D, E, F. Now, I don't always put the sharps in here. I'm just trying to do letters. But right now, you can see I've got the numbers 1 through 7 and the letters of the G scale. Now, beside the G, I'm going to start on the letter B, and I'm just going to say my scale again. B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And by going down, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, just going down the scale, I'm making my chart up really quickly. So now we have to start on D for the GBD chord. So we go D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then we remind ourselves that our dominant can have its 7th on it, and so can our supertonic. So at this point, this is what my chart looks like. Now, if you need it to be bigger and all just in one long row, grab some goose paper and just write it out nice and big. we are not finished with this chart because we need to figure out what our key of 5 is. Most hymns have a moment where either we temporarily go to the key, a new key, for one note, that's called your applied chord. That's your 5 of 5 to 5. And sometimes we do longer and even a whole phrase in the dominant. That's a modulation. So we have to be aware and look for this. So in the key of G major, our dominant key is D major. And at that point, we would be needing C sharp. And so I make sure that I have this planned completely before I begin to do my thought process for the rest of it. All of the exams for the Royal Conservatory provide you with a sheet at the back that is just manuscript paper. Often it's a completely separate sheet. One side is blank, the other side is your manuscript paper. You can write these things out easily. Just tear it off of the back. As a matter of fact, examiners are fine if that sheet of paper is not with the paper when you send it in. Now, our next thing is working one phrase at a time, and you'll notice that I'm going to be saying that many times. One phrase at a time, plan where your tonic chords are. So here's the thing. Every fermata is a cadence. Every fermata is the end of a phrase. So one of the things that we have been working very hard on through all of our theory is trying to determine that phrases were 4 bars in length. And in dances and in instrumental music, that's true. But what they found out in the church is that many people who are not trained musicians could not sing full 4 bars without a breath. So sometimes there's 2-bar sections. If we've got Bach, he just subdivided it equally. And other times it's just shortened here and there. So we just have to go with, there will be fermatas to tell us where every cadence is. So in this example, we are going through all of the first line and going to hear, this is our first cadence. Now, some things to keep in mind at the bottom is going to tell you that in hymns and chorales, your cadences are 95% of the time authentic or half. Occasionally, there is a deceptive cadence at the second last cadence of a piece. Plagal, please don't rule it out, but it is like 0.01% of the time that you're going to find a plagal cadence in a hymn. Originally, plagal was our Amen. But the Amen wasn't the cadence of the piece. It was just a prayerful ending. The cadence, indeed, was the 2 chords before that, which was always 5 to 1. And thus, it is that really the plagal cadence doesn't usually act as a full idea with regards to punctuation. But there are some moments where it seems to be the appropriate thing to put in, and composers enjoy surprising us. So when we look at the first line, the thing that we're looking for is, where can I put a 1 chord? Remembering that it can be 1 in root position with a G on the bottom, or 1 in first inversion with a B on the bottom. So we're going to go through and put our capital 1 under the upbeat. So now we go into full bar 1, it's on count 1. And none of the rest of bar 1 has a G or a B in the bass. When we get to bar 2 under the word crowned, we've got a B, so that's your 1 in first inversion. And under the word thorns, we have the G for a 1 in root position. Now our first phrase goes all the way to the first fermata. So we go down to the next line and say, wow, okay, right away we've got a 1, and then a 1 in first inversion, and then another 1. So the first phrase, and we're not going on from here, this is where my 1 chords have been labeled. So this is just like getting up into your car and learning to drive by deciding where you're going before you actually engage the car's whole steering system. So make your decision before you go. And we're going to actually plan the Roman numbers. I guarantee you that you will save time if you plan the Roman numbers first, rather than just going bop, bop, bop. and hoping that you're going to actually end up correct. You might not see patterns that you would otherwise see. So now we have the next most important thing in our toolbox is our dominant chord. So we need to look for dominance. So in this case, it's DFA. Now we could have any of those notes in the bass. Most likely it's the D, the root, or the F sharp for first inversion. But if it's a dominant seventh, you may have the A or the C. So I'm going to look at count 3 of the first full bar and say he's a 5 because we've got a D up to an F sharp. And there, I've got lead in my pencil. Now when we go to count 4, we see a D and a C. That means this is the D, F sharp, A, C, your dominant seventh in 4-2. Like this. Now, you're about to say, well, what about this one right here? Did you not say that C could be in the bass and then you just said over here this was a dominant 4-2? When you are doing your Roman numbers, you need to follow the same rules that you followed for your rests. Yes, we need to remember those from our rudiments. So we do join 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, but never 2 and 3. If I put a 5 chord here, hang on, if I put a 5 chord here, I'm backwards, I would have joined counts 2 to 3, and that would have syncopated my Roman numbers or given me what we call a harmonic rhythm error. So that's why I did not do it on count 2. When we look at the next bar, we see on count 4, we've got an F sharp up to an A. So that can be a 5 in first inversion. And then when we look at the end of here, before we go any further, we say, Karen, there is a C sharp there, and there's a C sharp over here. This is long enough that we are doing a full modulation. So at this point, we say, how do you get between two keys without there being a bump? Because I don't think that the music of this time would have had a moment that was jarring. And what we do is we use a pivot chord. A pivot chord is a note and chord that fit in both keys. So if we go to the chord, the first chord before the first accidental, I guess I should say the last chord before the first accidental, we see that it's GBD. And then we say in D major, GBD is a 4 chord. This is how we pivoted from G major to D major. Because right now, A to C sharp, we have to count from the key of D. D, E, F, G, A. That's your 5 in D major. And D up to D will be your 1. So I'm still only doing tonic and dominant chords, but I had to notice that I was going to a new key. So there's your trick. Go to the last chord before the first accidental and see whether he works in both keys. So you see in G major, we understand him to be a 1, and in D major, he's understood to be a 4, and he's going to go on to a 5. Now, we don't know at this point whether he might be a 5-7. Let's put a 5-7 in because we should be demonstrating that we know how to use all of the chords that are in our grade 9 vocabulary. Now that we have this, and freeze this frame and make sure yours match, we only have this and this to put a chord on that is not tonic or dominant. In the notes below, you're going to find that 2 goes before 5 very well. So in the first bar, we're going to put 2 in first inversion under the word that. And then we remember that it's supposed to be a small 2 because 2 is minor. When we get to bar 2, we've got 2 A's. You have 2 choices that are equally good. We can put a 7 diminished 6 here. We can put a 5-6-4 here and do a passing 6-4, but we cannot put 2 because 2 does not go to 1. So in there, we now have the plan for all of the first phrase. Now, I will always say at this point, remember, we're doing this in pencil for a reason. Just as when you get into the car and you drive down the street, sometimes you get to the corner and you suddenly discover that there is some sort of construction that you had not expected. And instead of turning right, you have to do like a couple of lefts to be able to get around to the area you're wanting to go to. Every now and again, we have to change a chord because we can't get rid of the parallels. Now, here's the thing. The secret to this is check for where your octave and your fifth is as you do each chord. If you wait till the end of the phrase and you discover that you have parallels between chord 2 and chord 3 and you have to change a note, you then have to check every other pair again, which is an incredible time sapper. We don't have time to do that. So being proactive and checking for your parallels as you go is very, very important. So when we draw our first chord, we really only have one choice. With our one chord, what we're doing now, we're not planning the whole thing. We're doing this phrase by phrase. We're going to draw in our first chord. So the only way to fit those notes in is to have our tenors singing the G and our altos singing the B. Now, we're pretty sure at this point that the sopranos are not happy we're starting the melody this slow, but they're just going to be okay with it over time. And when we go to the downbeat, we have another one chord, but the G is now in the soprano. So now I can take my alto to the D and my tenor to the B. And then before I go on, I take my own advice and I say, where is my octave? Where is my fifth? So notice that I counted this unison as my octave. And that I then, because there's two of these, it is the bass to the soprano that is a fifth and the tenor to the soprano that is a fifth. Now, because we went on to the same chord, G to D being in the same spot is fine. You have not moved anywhere. A parallel only happens when there's been a move of at least a half step. But I did put in my octave on my outer side because when I go from 1 to 2 in first inversion, there are no common tones, and so I can get into parallels. So I have my A and my C for your 2 in first inversion. The other note needed is an E. Is E closer to B or to D? I think it's closer to the E, so we're going to put it in the alto. Now, what note are we going to double? So we put in all three of the notes that are different first and then say that. Now, at this point, if we double the A, we are doubling the root, and that would work. If we double the C, we are doubling the subdominant of the key, and that's also legitimate. For now, let's double the root because that's usually a good way of keeping things moving nicely, but we need to check where our fifth and our octave is. So here it might look like we've got parallels, but we do not, because this is bass to soprano for our octave, and this is tenor to soprano for our octave. Bass to alto for our fifth, tenor to alto for our fifth. This is a good example. Now, when we go on to the 5 chord, we're not worried about any of the ones that came earlier. We're only comparing it to the 2 in first inversion. So we have a D and an F. Where are we going to put the A? The common tone, of course. And then Karen tries to draw it so it looks like a true A. And we're supposed to double our D. So we're going to put a D in the alto. And again, we immediately stop and say, my octave is bass to alto. The chord before it was tenor to soprano. That's good. My fifth in the 5 chord is bass to tenor. And in the previous chord, it is tenor to alto. So I have no parallels. I can go on. So please stop the video at any time that you need to listen to it again, and know that I will try and do this so that you can freeze it to get the right answer. Now in our 5-4-2, we have a D and an A. We need an F sharp. We can't put it above the soprano note, so that means he's going to go in the tenor. So now this is when I'm going to say to you, if you put the A in the alto, your altos are going to have to jump down from a D down to an A and go back up after. And that is not as effective voice leading as we could have. So this would be an instance where I'd say, make an incomplete dominant seventh, leave out the A, and simply have the altos sing the root of the chord with the sopranos. This actually balances the chord nicely. When we go on to our 1 and first inversion, we know we have to resolve our F sharp up to our G, and we have a common tone as D, and we still say, where's my octave? There is no fifth in my 5-4-2 chord, and once I check this out, I discover there's no fifth here, so G to D is fine. My octave is D to D here, alto to soprano, and it's tenor to soprano here. Now, let's draw the passing 6-4 here. The 7 diminished 6 or the 5-6-4 are equally correct, so it doesn't matter which you do. But let's use those 6-4 progressions when we can, and then not use the 6-4 chord any other time. So we already have one voice going do, re, mi, and another voice going mi, re, do. So that means we need one voice staying the same. So that's going to be the D, D, D. And the last voice is going to go do, ti, do. So G under crowned, F sharp in tenor under with, and G under thorns. And I know that this pattern, if I followed all of those, there will be no parallels because we got this contrary motion. And if you want to label that P6-4, that's what a lot of our university friends do, is they just say that's a passing 6-4. We don't really hear it as a dominant chord. And my octave and my fifth, I've got 2 fifths, so I have to be careful going on to here. My 5 and first inversion is DFA. I've got an A and an F sharp, so I must find a place for D. I've got a common tone. I cannot double my leading tone. So when I choose to double here, I can double my root, the D, or I can double my fifth, the A, but I cannot double the F sharp. So is the D or the A closer to G? It is the A. So that means that when I put in my last chord, it looks like this, and I have no parallels with this. Now, I'm going to tell you that when I mark exams, the most common place for people to make mistakes is when they have this chord to this chord, because they think about this being a line, and they don't think about how this connects up. But it is in the middle of a sentence. So what I recommend people do is just give themselves little dots to remind themselves where they came from. So here you go. I drew the notes that were right here just as tiny dots over here. You don't have to erase them on the exam. We know you're trying to make sure that you haven't created parallels or a leading tone that just leapt off into nowhere. So we have a 1 chord for GBD. We've got a G and a B. We need to find a home for D. It's the common tone. And we should double our G. Now, it looks like we ended up coming right back to the same chord we had right before our 5 and first inversion. But I want to put on all of my notices right here for where my fifth and my octave is. Now I go to a 1 in first inversion, and I remember that I'm still supposed to double my root in the 1 chord. Those primary chords, it really is best, whether in root position or first inversion, double the root. And then only if that just isn't going to work for your voice leading, go to the doubled fifth. So here we're going to put a D in our alto because it's another common tone, and we can put a G in our tenor as another common tone, and that means that this is stasis. You have moved nowhere. This is not parallel. And our octave is in a different place. And then we're going to the 1 chord. Yes, we can make it go right back to what we had at the beginning. Now, some of the people here are going to say, did we just break another rule? Because we joined 2 and 3. But the beginning of that joining was not count 2. The beginning was count 1. And that made it so that this pivot chord does not cause a harmonic rhythm error. Now we said that after that one chord that we now are thinking, I've got to be planning in D major in my head. I'm going to do my chord as A, C sharp, E, G. How can I do that and not end up with parallels? And this is a very good question. If we do this, we end up, hang on, A, C sharp, E, G, with parallel fifths from here to here. If we rearrange this, we end up with trebles. So this is where I say we're going to go back. And we are going to say, what if we've come to one of those moments of construction and we go back to the beginning of this line and say we are in D major there, and that the first 1 and 1/6 is really a 4 and a 4/6 in D major, and now I don't have to have this chord as a 1. I can change it to E, G, B to go into here. What I just did was faster than you could have. I figured out that 4 to 5 was not going to work. Now your first clue was that the soprano was going up, because we learned earlier in our session with no common tones that if the bass rises, everything else has to fall in 4 to 5. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So that was what the clue on the page was. But I allowed us to walk into it so that we could actually go, hang on, sometimes there's construction at the end of the street. That's why we have an eraser on the end of the pencil. And now I have this, that these are my 4 chords. I changed this to a 2 in first inversion. Now I can go A, C sharp, E, G. I have a complete dominant 7th, so I'm going to use an incomplete tonic chord here and make sure my 7th, the G, goes down a second to the F sharp, and I'm going to have a tripled root. And in that way, leading tone rises, 7th falls, no parallels. Now at this point, we now have a hymn that sounds like this. 1, 2, 3. And you can hear how when the composer was talking about something being glorious, he led to the highest note so far. And he got that accidental in, so we felt like, oh my goodness, that's a special moment. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go through and we're going to plan the Roman numbers for the rest of this, but you're going to take the rest of this to put in the alto and tenor as your assignment for the next lesson. So because the C sharp is still in measure 5, and then I look ahead to the cadence point, the next fermata, and find out it's D to an F sharp, we're going to do this whole phrase in D major. Now, what a lot of my students do is they just take another color of pen and they take this same chart and they go, now I've got D is 1. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So what I did was beside each one of these in a different color, I put what these letters would be. Now some students find it hard to look at 2 numbers if they don't color code it, and others just find that they just want to write it out as a separate set of chords because there's so many notes in this particular key. So, and then we actually stop and go, remember that your 5 can have a 7th and your supertonic can have a 7th. So now when we go to the next chord, we have an upbeat. One of the things I encourage everybody to really be aware of is that upbeats tend to be tonic or dominant, and the dominant really pushes nicely into the downbeat. Upbeats can even be 5 of 5, and those are truly very effective. So in here, at the end of measure 4, I can't make that into a 1 of D major no matter how hard I try, but I can make it into a 5-4-2, A, C, E, G. And of course that would be C sharp. Watch those accidentals. And we all know that the chord after 5-4-2 must be a 1 in first inversion. So now for this chord, we say to ourselves, I need to look for this phrase, where can I put 1s? Well, we just had a 1 in first inversion on the downbeat under Roy of Royal. It looks like we can have a 1 under die and a 1 under a. And then when we go to the next phrase under Dorns. So in here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chords, and 4 of them, half of them are tonic chords. That's one of the ways to make you feel better about doing this particular challenge, because it can look like you've got 28 chords to do, but once you realize that half of them are tonic chords, it isn't quite as scary. So now 5 chords. Well, there's a C sharp on count 2 of bar 5. That could be the 5-6-4 for a passing 6-4. It could be a 5-4-3, or it could be a 7 diminished 6. All of those are possible. You just get to choose what's working out the best for you. And that's nice to have options, because that's one way of getting yourself out of sticky wickets with parallel octaves. And then when we look in bar 6, our count 2 is definitely going to be a 5, because we are thinking we have an authentic cadence here in D major. Once we got our 5s and our 1s in, we only have one more chord to put in, and it's the chord right before the 5 chord, and often that is 2 in first inversion, and look, that's what it is here. So that means that's what that is. But now we end up with a little bit of a challenge, because we have to now do the bass line as well. So know where you're going. Your final note is going to be a full bar of tonic in the bass. So go ahead and just write it in. Know where you're going. And then we can see that the last 3 notes of this particular melody are 3 blind mice. The last 3 notes, 3 blind mice. I did that in the wrong key. It was 3. Yeah, I was in G flat major instead of G major. But if you have mi, re, do at the end, and you get to put in your bass clef, please put in the cadential 6-4. We want you to know that that is what we want there, because that's what composers did. So let's put in 5-8-6-4-7-5-3 to 1 as our final cadence. That is the most finalizing sound, to have the dominant 7th in root position going to the 1 in root position, and to have it decorated by the 6-4 chord. The cadential 6-4 is actually called, it's an appoggiatura 6-4 that helps to bring emphasis to the cadence. So in there, that means that at this point we know that our bass clef bass notes would be bum, 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 and that only leaves us a little bit more to put in. Now, we have a situation where from the word to mighty is a massive leap. And this is the place where people get into all sorts of trouble with either overlapping or range. So right off the bat, I encourage people to actually look at those big leaps and say, chances are this one is a unison and it's going to stay the same here, so that this is the maximum octave, but it isn't higher than that soprano, because we're not supposed to cross voices like that. This alto can meet the soprano, but it shouldn't go higher than what the soprano just was. When we look at it that way, that means that this is either going to be the one chord in first inversion of G major, or maybe we should stop and say, are we back in G major? And the answer is yes, we are back in G major for our last phrase. And I'm just going to put G major colon at this point. We've had a breath, so we can just start right off in G major. Now, because we had at the beginning of the previous phrase 5-4-2 to 1-6, let's try that again, because that makes the bass move smoothly, because that would mean a C in the bass of 5-4-2 and a B in the bass of 1 in first inversion. We want to make sure the basses move mostly by steps and that the leap would be at the cadence. That's what our aim is, to be stylistic as well as accurate. And now we only have one more chord to put in, and yes, we can actually make that a tonic chord. Okay, now I'm going to hold it like this. At this point, this is what your sheet should look like for the end of this video. Your responsibility now is to go in here and fill in these inner voices. Remember, I had one chord over here that I had to erase because it wasn't working the way I originally planned. There might be a moment like this. Make sure you are thinking in D major with C sharps and then in G major without the C sharps. And then notice that I put my fermata under my G right away so that I could not forget it. Keep the files handy for the chorale how-to moment and things to think about. These will help you, and you can add to them for other things that you can think are important in your journey with filling in the harmonization of a hymn or a chorale. Thank you for having fun on theory today at the grade 9 level.